Hello, welcome back on XPRIMM TV. We're now at a special edition of Risk Hour, broadcasted live from the Royal Casino in Sinaia, from the 14th edition of FIAR, the International Insurance Reinsurance Forum. We have today three major topics on the agenda that we would like to address with our guests. First, the results in the first quarter of this year, of 2011, for the Romanian insurance market, the perspectives for the market, and the main problems for this industry. I would like to present to you our guest for today, Mr. Angambir, General Manager Allianz Siriac Asigurări. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Martin Hașca, Member of the Board Asirom VIG.
Okay, thank you.
And Alexandru Ciuncan, Secretary General from the Association for Insurance Promotion, also known as APA. Welcome, Alexandru. Would like, if you allow me, I would like to make an introduction just to get acquainted with the topic today. Anticipated to be the most difficult year for insurance, 2011 began with a market decrease of nearly 10% in European currency for the Romanian insurance market. Well, the first quarter confirmed some pessimistic estimations regarding the market evolution, and if the pace is maintained, the market would get closer to the level recorded in 2006. Under these circumstances, we wonder, did the toughest year begin? And I would like to address the first question to Mr. Bir. How would you comment upon the results I was telling you about, so the 10% market decrease? How did this happen? If you can give us a couple of details. What's your opinion?
Sure. As we encountered in the first quarter of this year, we basically are following a trend what we have seen already in 2010. And of course, the big decrease was driven by the motor business, both in Casco as well as in MTPL. What we know from the figures, not only in the first quarter, but as we also see it in the first 4 months, motor sales in general, which is a big driver for the Casco business, was also decreasing, and that had an immediate impact overall on the Casco volumes across the market. We saw some figures where car sales, both new as well as second-hand cars, decreasing by nearly 20% or more in the first 4 months of the year.
So basically the motor insurance business is responsible for this
overall
increase.
For the overall market results, for sure it is driven by the motor insurance side, Casco being a large part, which is driven by market factors, where the car sales have decreased, which has had an impact. And of course, the second part, which has also had an impact on the decline of the market, has been MTPL, where the factor has been slightly different, because what we have seen is there is a very slight reduction in terms of the number of risks by around 3%. But the big driving factor for the decrease in MTPL in the first quarter has been really the pricing, because the pricing went down quite sharply, and that of course impacted the total motor market, and motor being, let's say, more than 75% of the non-life insurance segment, and nearly 60% of the total insurance market, of course, was impacting the overall market figures in the first quarter.
Mr. Hașca, what's your opinion on this topic? Is the decrease, let's say, is the motor insurance business responsible for this decrease?
I think in insurance in general, insurance follows normal economic trends. So clearly, if the economy is not performing with a certain time lag, insurance will stop performing, because the economy generates assets that are insured. So if you don't generate that many assets, you'll need less insurance. Naturally, it's not a one-to-one relationship, because you have one or multi-year contracts. It takes some time for that to go through the market. And we also know that if it comes to, let's say, personal investment in assets, one of the predominant assets were cars. So clearly, if people buy less cars, you will see it in insurance premiums with, let's say, half to a year later. At the same time, if people are looking at their personal expenses, one of them naturally being insurance premiums, you will have the same thing once consumption slows down and people try to trim their expenses. They will either stop buying insurance or force the market, force the players to go down with prices, which, as Rangam said, even if you have the same number of pieces, if the average cost goes down, the market goes down as well.
Sure.
Alexandru, yeah, I would like to address you the same question, and if you can tell us the perspective of the customer. Why does the customer doesn't buy that much insurance anymore, and motor insurance and MTPL, which is mandatory?
So as far as I have understood for the data which was presented during the international conference by our colleagues, it seems that the main problem is that people are buying the same amount of insurance, basically, if I'm referring to motor insurance, especially MTPL. So I do not see a decrease in the penetration degree for this type of insurance, but people are actually paying less. The average premium for MTPL is rumored to be around 60 euros instead of 80 to 100 euros 1 year ago. So actually people are buying the same coverage, more or less, but they pay less, and probably this has affected the overall results of the Romanian insurance market. And this is what I've understood from both of you previously. You also spoke during the conference. Mr. Ragambir from Allianz Triac had a very interesting speech in the beginning of the conference, and he basically spoke about the overall perspectives of the Romanian insurance market. And if you allow me, I would like to make use of both of you and your international experience. And going back to MTPL, I would like to know what is the average premium in some advanced and more developed market. I know, for example, that in Bulgaria, the average premium is even higher than in Romania.
Well, if I pick up a little bit the point over here, I will touch upon the issue with regard to the average premium, but one aspect which you mentioned, in certain segments, let's say the market was driven by people actually reducing their consumption. Okay, so for example, if we take a look at in the motor casco area, the overall casco insurance has decreased because a lot of people actually gave up on their cars or gave up on their existing leasing contracts, and that was a real decrease in terms of the number of risks, which had an effect on the market. The same also had an effect on the MTPL, not sorry on the MTPL, but on the property side, where a lot of the companies which went bankrupt or had to reduce their activities also reduced the need for their insurance, and that had an impact also on the property segment in general because of the crisis environment. But coming down to MTPL, of course, considering that it's a mandatory line of business, the movements over here should be, in terms of the number of risks decreasing, has not really happened. It should be fairly more or less stable. A key driver in this particular regard is pricing. And one can imagine that in a crisis environment, customers are quite stretched because of the economic condition, because of stagnating salaries, because of unemployment, not being very secure about their future. So of course they want to be very prudent in terms of how much money they spend on what types of insurances, and they are looking out very much for pricing. And to that extent, yes, in a crisis environment, one can imagine that companies like ourselves and others are looking at offering the clients the best value for money given the environment, and for that reason we do a thorough analysis of our portfolio. We take a look in terms of, which segments of the portfolio are profitable, what kind of risks we carry, and we try to adjust the risk adequate pricing. Yeah. What we have also done in last year, for example, we have in our portfolio where we have done a thorough analysis, we have taken a look at accounts which are making huge losses. We have actually done very strict underwriting, taken those risks off our books, which gives us more flexibility than to offer the retail clients, individual clients who don't have such high loss ratios. Because if we take MTPL, the frequency on MTPL is very low on the individual retail clients. Yeah, so that means only 5% of the entire MTPL retail population is really coming up with a claim. So that gives us some flexibility, and companies like ourselves have tried to adapt to that situation by analyzing our portfolio deeply and offering clients value-added, let's say, risk-based premium, considering the situation. But of course, that somehow leads to then a dynamic where it leads to decreasing prices, and you reach a point where prices are no longer risk adequate. What is very important is you have to be aware at the end, we as insurance companies carry risk, and we should be able to pay the claims, and MTPL claims are claims coming from the future. And it's a very key question which you raised. When initially the idea of offering clients, flexibility, reasonable pricing in a crisis conditions was valid, the question is whether the prices went down to a level which can be sustained anymore from an insurance market perspective. And very clearly, as you mentioned, Alexandru, that some of the markets have taken measures. If you take the Bulgarian market, the regulator even stepped in and imposed some conditions with regard to minimum pricing levels, because that is very important for the financial safety and stability of the industry. And we know, for example, on the MTPL side, we as a company face very high combined ratios, and I think that is across the industry. And it is not only because of just the claims we pay. We have seen in the market an increasing tendency for bodily injury claims as Romania has entered a part of the European Union. The limits of liability under the MTPL policies have gone up to European levels, and of course clients have a tendency to then claim the full value which is provided in the law, in the MTPL policy. And for that, of course, pricing levels have to be more realistic in terms of the future, in terms of the future claims paying ability. And we have seen this in other markets. Prices are quite, let's say, quite significantly higher. And for the future stability and development of the market, it is quite important to have realistic pricing. Maybe Martin wants to say something on this.
Yeah. Martin, would you say that on the Romanian market, let's say, the MTPL prices are risk-related or not?
I would say at the moment they are not. I think quite a few insurance companies have also taken the opportunity to gain a certain amount of market share through low prices, with people being more price sensitive, which from a consumer perspective I understand. I think the important thing that one has to keep in mind is we are not providing a free service, which means we have shareholders that put in hard cash into these companies to sustain this business. And it's very important that we have this cash, because if we don't get premiums, we still have to pay claims. And I think it's also important for people to understand, especially in MTPL, I know it's like a tax, and there's no, let's say, tangible benefit of paying more for a product, because the mindset is partially, it's not my claim, it's someone else's claim. In the end, one has to be very realistic. We are insuring a risk of the individual driving the car. So that's what insurance is for, because individually you could never bear that risk, because you would need your own capital. Because if you suddenly have to put up, I don't know, 100, 500,000 euros for a bodily injury, you couldn't afford it. That's why we have insurance companies. We spread risk. We do not create the risk. So people have to be very clear that we are taking their personal risk, we are insuring it, we're spreading it, we cannot eliminate it. Yes. And as long as that risk stays or even increases, as it does at the moment, it will either cost more money in terms of premium, or shareholders will have to put in more money to back exactly the promise that we make, that we will take that risk, which naturally they will also look from an economic perspective, since they want to see returns. I'm not saying that we want to live off the back of the people, but if you put up risk capital, you will want to see some money back. It's the same thing. If you put money in the bank, you
Would
also want to see interest.
Would you support a decision like Mr. Beer was telling us earlier on, like having a minimum price for MTPL on a market? Is that, let's say, normal or?
I think in MTPL there are a lot of markets, even in general liberal markets, where you have minimum pricing, and that's actually to protect the insurance customer. It's not to sustain the insurance companies, it's there to protect the insurance customer, that he knows that the insurance company in the end will have enough money to pay the claims. Personally, I do not support these kind of rules. I think we also have other tools in the industry because we have minimum capital requirements for the companies. We have different accounting rules that should actually make us prudent. We're facing a new solvency regime, which again governs the capital of insurance companies with Solvency II, where the risk aspect is more in the forefront than it was in the past. So to make sure that an insurance company has enough money, enough capital to back the promises. That, in general, should be the tool that we use to drive pricing and make companies demand adequate premiums. Clearly, we also know, and we've also seen in the last couple of years, markets are not perfect, so you go through different cycles. There, it might be the prudent approach from time to actually come in with minimum prices.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mr. Beer? Would you support a decision like having minimum pricing for MTPL? Is that healthy for market or?
Being honest with you, I think the market in general, I principally, again, share Martin's view in this regard, that in principle, markets should be allowed to operate on a free basis. And what I mean by this is, again, companies, of course, should be able to evaluate the risks they carry on their books, they carry on their portfolio. They are all required by law to do actuarial evaluations to make sure that there are enough reserves to pay for potential claims, which would be coming up onto the books and are bound to happen based on years of statistics. And based on the kind of reserves we put on the books, we are of course required to maintain levels of solvency, levels of liquidity, and of course needed to be backed up by capital being injected by the shareholders. So there is a full financial framework on the basis of which companies are required to act and conduct themselves in the market. And then pricing is generally coming as a factor of these financial decisions they take, including reinsurance, because if you have reinsurance protection, then you have a different, let's say, pricing tool. Then if you do not have reinsurance and you carry the risk on your books, then you need to back it up with adequate capital from the shareholders. So this frame exists, and as long as we have a prudent approach and companies are balancing out all of these different aspects with full obligations towards their shareholders, then pricing should be a factor of risk. And therefore, principally from my side, I would say having price controls would be the last step and a kind of an extreme step that any regulator would need to take. But that step might become necessary in order to overall protect the consumer and protect the market itself. Because if we really see, and at the end, it is the reputation of the market which is very important. You know, you need to, the Romania's insurance market has to have a positive reputation. The industry needs a positive reputation, and the reputation comes from the ability of companies to be able to pay a claim. Because if we as companies do not have the financial capability to pay a claim, then of course the reputation suffers, the reputation of the market suffers, and that I think cannot be good for anybody, none of the market players, including the clients, because then clients lose trust on this very valid instrument they have, which they buy to protect themselves in terms of difficulty. And if they cannot rely on that, and companies are not able to fulfill their obligations, and all the time then, any kind of special victim fund or protection fund has to step in to cover this. It is financially and reputationally damaging for the market. And if we ever reach that situation where the reputation of the market needs to be protected, then for sure, I think that might be a valid step, because it is for more the long-term view of the market and long-term sustainability of the market. But that is, as I said, a step of last resort that needs to be taken to basically put the market on sound footing.
First of all, if you allow me, I think we are speaking about a loop here, a loop which needs to be closed, to be fulfilled. I think that clients will prefer a higher pricing on MTPL for a higher quality of services. Of course, this is not happening now in the first phase of the development, economical development, insurance development, but in the future, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, or at least we are hoping that people will start to realize that if you buy a cheap product, basically a cheap service, you will get a lower quality. And of course, MTPL does not actually refer to you, but to the injured party. But once you will be hit and you will be involved in a traffic accident, and you will be hit by an insured person owing very cheap, low quality MTPL, then you will suffer. You will have to pay your own claim by using your motor hull insurance. Your premium will go up, and this is the loop I'm talking about. So I think in the future, the public will be more and more informed, and they will start to understand, just like they do with each and every product and service, that if you pay less, you get less in the end. Mm-hmm. It's probably a matter of time.
Alexandru, what would you say is the most important thing that the client looks at when buying MTPL right now? Is it the pricing? Is it the company's reputation on the Romanian market?
Unfortunately, according to our studies, if you're speaking about individual clients or about corporate clients, both of them tend to look at pricing. But we are hoping that this will change into the future. This will change once after people will start to understand more about insurances. They will understand the need, and I'm speaking about individual customers, the need of a proper coverage. And we can also go and start discussing about the mandatory household insurance scheme, which is now currently under development, in a different phase of development than we have expected to be in. But we have also can make a comparison between MTPL and the mandatory household insurance scheme, because more or less both of them have the same principle. It's a mandatory policy. One of them refers to you, the other refers to the injured party, but both of them are mandatory. And look what's happening on the market, on the household insurance zone or part, where people are looking for the cheapest coverage possible. Once they will get a claim and they will not receive any kind of compensation or little compensation from the insurance company, they will start to look at better services.
Mr. Hashka, do you think it's possible to shift this perspective, the client's perspective, from pricing towards, let's say, a company's reputation?
I think if we look globally, that's what's happened in a lot of markets. I mean, it's clear also internationally markets go through certain cycles. If we take Western Europe as an example, we also know the prices go up and down. The big thing, of course, has been that people have become aware that oftentimes a cheap price does mean worse service. In the end, not paying claims. I'm not saying that it's good for a market to have an insurance company to go bankrupt. That taints the whole market. But it has to be clear, also as Alexandru said, if you don't pay for it and then suddenly your claim is not covered, or maybe it takes some time. I'm not saying that it won't be paid, but maybe it takes longer. Well, you have the risk. You have the obligation as a person. It's not the insurance company primarily. It's you yourself. And as people become or try to enforce that more, which I, as a third party, would do. So if someone damages my car, my property, and within reasonable time I do not get my money, I don't really care who the insurer of the counterparty is. I will go to the counterparty. And as soon as people start feeling that suddenly they actually have to put up their own money because they didn't have proper coverage, that clearly will drive the perspective of quality more. Also, the culture of making claims against a third party is changing. We know, especially on the bodily injury, on moral damage side, that is starting. It's nowhere close to levels that we know from other countries, but it's getting there. So whereas, I don't know, 5 years ago, probably bodily injury claims were less than 1% of total compensation paid, it's going towards 5, towards 10, and more. And the interesting thing is, here in Romania, we're discussing a lot about physical damage, insurance companies paying to repair shops, spare parts, and so on. In Western Europe, that's actually not the issue. In Western Europe, you're discussing cost of bodily injury claims because the ratio is like 9 to 1, 10 to 1 towards physical damage. And there people feel it because you've got a person who's been damaged, not a car. A car has no feeling. A person does. And there also the reaction between the damaged party and the one who caused the damage is different. And they will make sure that they get their money in time. And if the insurance company doesn't back it up, you personally will have to pay. And then you start thinking, what does this protection actually mean?
Mr. Beer, do you think that in the, let's say, medium term, you can convince a client to buy insurance from a company with a good reputation on the market rather than buying, let's say, cheap insurance? Is it possible in the medium term on the Romanian market, or it's still, the situation is going to stay the same for a number of years?
No, I think in the medium term it will be possible because at the end people will become far more sensitive to the increasing instances where they are confronted with. And I mean, we have seen statistics with regard to motor accidents, motor accident damages. Romania has one of the highest rates of, let's say, motor accidents at the European level. And all of this has an impact in terms of the claims which are caused. And behind every claim, there are people. You have people who are affected and they have, let's say, a tremendous loss either for the family, and that needs to be, people need to recognize this, and they have to become sensitive to that, considering that at the end it is a liability of their own actions. And very importantly, if other companies, if they, of course, in the past, clients, or even today, clients did not really care. They looked for the cheapest offer and said, it's not my problem, that other company has to pay for the third party. I'm not affected by this. But increasingly, as they get confronted with the situation, as we get confronted with more, let's say, bodily injury claims and litigations going to court, people will also have to start feeling. And just to give you a very personal story, which we experienced, it was a very sad case where we, Allianz, as a company, paid a claim, was of a very young girl who was hurt together with her family, her mother and her father, and she was really surviving and struggling for her life. And it was a huge claim, but even our claims handlers were emotionally touched by the complexity of the case. And as a company, we decided to say, she's a very young girl and she needs the best possible medical attention, and she cannot get this attention in Romania. So we got in touch with the help of our group companies, with doctors in Austria, to get second opinion, to find out what kind of medical treatment could be provided for her, so that we could support her family, just on a kind of a basis, humanitarian basis, where she can try to get back. I mean, it would never be, I would say it is impossible that she could get back her life before the accident, but at least to recover some sense of normalcy in their lives. And this is what we call the level of service. You know, when we talk about, and all of this again costs money, when you really want to be able to offer this kind of value, sure, the person who caused the accident is not paying for all of this, but again, if we were not doing it, this whole responsibility would come back on this person. And would he be able to do it by himself? No. Would the price, the cheaper he pay, you know, the cheaper price you pay, would you be able to deliver this kind of service? No. But does this kind of service actually have an impact, has a value for the people? Sure. I mean, we can never claim that we take away the pain the people suffer after an accident, but we can try to mitigate it to the maximum extent possible. And that is important. And this part of the message at the end, of course, all of us have to communicate, try to get this message across, but I'm quite sure people will begin to recognize that.
And as because we're getting close to the end of the show, I would like to ask you, how do you see the perspectives for the Romanian market for this year? Would you say that the market is going to finish with an increase, a decrease, or stay at the same level? Mr. Hashka?
If I really knew it, I could at least bet some money on it. So sadly, I don't know it exactly. I think we will end up with, let's say, plus minus zero. The key question will be how quickly the economy picks up again. As I said before, we have a time lag in insurance until that also drives through into the insurance business. While we have seen some price decreases at the beginning of the year, we also know that some of the companies that were heavily involved in driving down prices in the last 2 years have actually stopped with that strategy. So there are initiatives. I think at the moment the companies that are still working on their pricing are those that can afford it because they have strong shareholders behind them. So they know what they are doing. They know that if they don't get the premium, they need capital, and they get that from the shareholders. So I do expect that by middle of the year, pricing should go in a direction that it makes sense again, because I think we're at that tail end of the cycle. And again, as I said, the ones doing it now are the companies that actually can afford it. So it's not last-ditch attempts to gain market share. It's actually saying, okay, we didn't do it for a couple of years, and I'm talking mostly international investors. Now we can actually use the reserves that we built over the last years and actually do something because we have the reserves.
Thank you very much for the conclusion, Mr. Bir. What do you think? Are we going to experience an increase, a decrease, or stay at the same level this year?
Well, considering the fact that in the first quarter and already the first 4 or 5 months we have seen a decrease, the fact is, first of all, until we reach the end of the year, we need to compensate for this decrease and then try to achieve some more growth. So in the best case situation, if, you know, overall the economic sentiment improves, the consumption improves, then until the end of the year, we might see some recovery. But in my personal opinion, if we do not see an improvement overall, considering the decrease that we have had, if we don't see an improvement in the pricing situation until the end of the year, we will definitely not see any positive development. With all the different actions, with an improvement in sentiment, with a recovery in the second part of the year, the best case situation we can achieve really is achieving the same level as last year. But if there is no pricing action which takes place, we might even stay with the decrease until the end of the year. So it's very much driven by these factors. But best case, especially on the non-life side, we would achieve the same level as in the previous year.
Alexander, do you have a conclusion for us? What do you think?
Well, basically, I'm referring to your last questions. I would prefer not to comment upon the figures of the Romanian insurance market because I do believe that from a client perspective, industry figures are not that relevant. In fact, they are not relevant at all. customers do not really care how big is the Romanian insurance industry. And what the association is doing at the moment, the Association for Insurance Promoting is doing educational campaign, national educational campaigns. We have done 3 of those up until now. We distributed more than 10 million brochures throughout Romania, both on MTPL, motor hull, and property insurance. And we will continue to do at least 3 other national campaigns this year. Why we are doing this? Because we believe that clients actually need to be more and more informed about the services, about the insurance cover that they can buy. So in a nutshell, they don't care about the size of the market. They care about the services which are available to them.
Thank you very much for the conclusion, Alexandru. So basically we spoke today we addressed 3 major topics, the results for the first quarter in 2011, the perspectives on the market and also the MTPL subject, and of course some problems present on the Romanian market. I would like to thank our guest today, Mr. Angambir, the president of Allianz Siriac. Thank you. Mr. Martin Hașca, member of the board Asirom VIG, and Alexandru Ciuncan, Secretary General of the Association for Insurance Promoting Romania. Once again, thank you very much for your attention, and stay on XPRIMM TV.